Hello and welcome to the Good Society Forum. My name is Emma Skye and I'm Director of Yale World Fellows and co-host of the Good Society Forum, which is a community of change makers around the world with a common quest to build the good society. My co-host is Nizam Uddin of the Prince's Trust and a 2019 Yale World Fellow. Niz.
Thank you so much, Emma. And hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. It's been a few weeks. We've missed you all and really thrilled that you could be joining us today. We're especially grateful for you being part of our community today, which is dedicated to building the good society, as Emma has said. Quickly want to give a shout out to all of our social media platforms. We've just really excitedly launched a new Facebook page that we would love for you to where we will be updating thought leadership pieces, upcoming webinars, old webinars, and write-ups. We are also on Twitter at GoodSoc Forum, as well as on being on LinkedIn. So we encourage you to please follow us on those platforms. If you have any ideas for Good Society Forum sessions, we are really keen to hear from you. You are our community, and we want to make sure we serve you as best as we can. And if you want to be a panelist, please email us info@goodsocietyforum.com. We're going to be hearing from 3 speakers today, and then we're going to take your questions, but we encourage you to place your thoughts, your questions as we go along. Now, we're really keen as ever, and for those of you who've joined us, you've done this before, we want to know where the community is from. So if you wouldn't mind just going onto your chat function and typing in the city and the country that you're currently in, we would love to get a sense of where everybody is from today. Wonderful, there we go. Brian from Victoria, Canada. Christina from the Bahamas. Oh my God, the Bahamas, I'm immediately jealous. We have Amjad from Switzerland. Oh, it's going so fast. Kim from Chicago. Andy from, oh, I missed Andy right there. Christina Velez, 2019 Well Fellow from Bogota in Colombia. Thank you for joining us. We have Michelle from New York. Emma, they're going really fast. Feel free to help me out here because I think
from Tunisia.
Daniel from the Obama Foundation in the house from DC. Thank you very much.
Renee from Sesame Street.
Anna from the Netherlands. We've been very lucky since beginning this journey of the Good Society Forum in April of this year to have built an incredible global community. And we're so thrilled that you could be with us today. Dr. Etim from Nigeria, thank you again for joining us. You have been a dedicated supporter and member of our community. Really delighted to have you here. Tom from Darlington in the UK, thank you. Giovanni from Germany, Jeremiah from Tel Aviv in Israel. Wonderful to have you all here. So Emma, what are we going to be discussing today?
The pandemic has upended the normal way of life. Among the many implications of COVID-19, there's been a huge emotional toll, not only in our everyday lives, but across societies, as people grapple not only with the new and unknown virus, but with the changes to policy that have had wide-ranging economic and social impacts. How people feel within a society matters. As the crisis looks set to continue into 2021, addressing the emotional well-being of individuals and communities alike will be key to societal resilience. So today, we're going to discuss how a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of emotions and their central role in fostering personal and collective resilience can help shape better politics and bring communities together. Our first speaker today is Professor Marc Brackett, the founder and director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Study Center of Yale University. He is the lead developer of Ruler, an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that has been adopted by nearly 2,000 pre-K through high schools across the United States and in other countries. He also serves on the board of directors for the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning. Marc, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Emma. I appreciate the invitation. And I feel like I have my 7 minutes of fame with the with the society to get my words out. So let me just start by asking everyone who's on the webinar today, how are you feeling? Really, how are you feeling? Let's type in those words. What are the emotions that you're experiencing right now? We have tired, scared, hopeful, exhausted, calm, up and down, content, fraught, interested, exhausted, bored, excited, tired, stressed. So this is our reality. I just want to start off by saying a few things. One is, over the last 8 months, our center has done a number of studies looking at how are people across America and in other countries feeling. And the number one word that people say they've been feeling across every study has been anxiety. Number one, anxiety. When we asked about children, anxiety, frustration, boredom. And one of the things that's interesting to me as an emotion scientist is I want to know, how are you really feeling? Anxiety might be the word, but maybe we're just using terms like stress and anxiety in ways that are not, as granular or specific as they could be to get our needs met. And so by way of example, I did a presentation about a week ago for 100 leaders, superintendents of schools. And I asked them, what's the psychological difference between anxiety, fear, stressed, overwhelmed? What would you say would be the number one response? What do you think these 100 leaders said the difference was among these 4 different concepts? Anxiety, fear, stressed, overwhelmed. Anybody want to just type that in? What do you think? Thank you very much, Samia. You're exactly right. The number one response was there's no difference. I actually had to take a picture of it because it was just perfect for my own, for giving speeches like this. There are huge differences, right? Anxiety is about uncertainty. Fear is about danger. Stress is about having too many demands and not enough resources. Overwhelmed is having just way too much, on your plate that you can't breathe. You feel like you have no freedom. And so what I've learned over the course of my career is that most of us don't have an emotion education. We don't really necessarily know how we're feeling or how other people are feeling. And this is why in my book, which is called Permission to Feel, I say we all have to strive to be emotion scientists, compassionate emotion scientists, as opposed to emotion judges. And so Emma and team are interested in this idea of resilience. And what I want to say is that there are multiple pathways to resilience. One, that term to me oftentimes gets a little complicated because it makes it seem like it's an individual's responsibility to develop resilience. And I think we're going to hear from our other colleagues today that maybe that's not the right way to think about it. Yes, we need skills. I need skills to manage my anxiety and stress. Believe me, I really do need them. But we don't live in isolation of other people, even in this socially distanced world. And when you're talking about families and schools, they're in communities, people are growing up in these communities. And what I argue is that those communities need to be the best possible role models for what it means to be emotionally skilled and resilient. So very briefly, some little steps, and people said, I want to give you some practical tips. I think the first step is that we have to give ourselves and everyone that we love and care about, and even the people we don't even like so much, the permission to be their true, full feeling selves. That we have to honor that there is no such thing as a bad emotion. So many people have reached out to our center, like thousands over the last couple of months, saying, how do I get rid of my anxiety? And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think with everything that's going on in society, between racism, the coronavirus, politics, other pandemics like big fires that are happening across the nation, we have to learn how to not necessarily get rid of our anxiety, but learn how to use that anxiety wisely and label it properly as well. To strive to be happy all the time, I mean, that's kind of weird, really, when you think about it. Like, I don't want to be anxious, I want to be happy. That striving for happiness can actually lead to greater experience of unpleasant feelings. I think the second goal is that we have to strive to be emotion scientists, to get granular, to get specific, to unpack how we're really feeling and be those caring, loving, compassionate people for others, like our children and our students and our colleagues. And then the question comes in, so what do we do when we have to manage our feelings? And I've thought a lot about this over the last number of months. And I think I've come up with 7 domains that can support us in building resilience. The first is always about permission to feel, giving yourself that permission to not be a judge of your emotions, to not think that emotions are good or bad. Emotions are experiences. The second is that we have to learn how to manage our physiology. Because of the stress levels in our nation right now and across the world, we have people who are in fight, flight, freeze mode all day long. And short spurts of anxiety and stress, helpful, make you productive, can lead to creativity. But when you're in a constant fight, flight, freeze mode, right, it just breaks apart your immune system, it breaks apart your cognition. Also impacts your immune system and physical and mental health. So we've got to learn, maybe it's mindfulness, maybe it's deep breathing exercises, giving yourself some space to take a walk. We know that we have to manage our physiology in terms of our biology, sleep, nutrition, movement, all associated with better emotion management. It's interesting when you think about it, like, why would sleep be related to emotion regulation? Well, if your resources are depleted, right, it's harder to use those cognitive resources to engage in better regulation. The third is doing things you enjoy. And that doesn't mean buying expensive things. It means taking a little walk, doing a little drawing, listening to a podcast, reading a book, just giving yourself some space without the news, without the radio, without listening, without working. I think the big one right now is a crisis also in connection. Loneliness is at all-time highs. And so what I want to share with you is one thought. We're so used to enjoying, or I should say, we're so used to thinking about empathy as being helping someone get through a very unfortunate circumstance. By way of example, I lost my aunt to COVID, and about 5 weeks ago, thousands of people reached out to me. There was one element of good news. 5 people reached out to me. And so I want to end with saying that we have to think about not only traditional empathy, but what we might call positive empathy. Look for ways to let people know that you care. Look for ways to let people know that you appreciate them. As a matter of fact, the last thing I'll say, because I know my time is up, is the number one word that our nation's educators share that they want to feel right here, right now, this week, is appreciation. So find a way to let someone know that you care about them and show your gratitude. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back to my colleagues.
Marc, well, let me take this moment to show my and our appreciation for you and your time and for your contributions today, and our condolences for your loss. That was incredible and a fantastic start. Marc, thank you. And just last year, around this time last year, I had the fortune of actually being with a group of very international fellows at Yale, and we did a brilliant exercise with Marc about how different cultures interact with emotional intelligence, which I'm sure we'll delve into later. We've had remarks already. If you have any questions, comments, please do put them into the chat function. We'll be sure to put them to our speakers soon. I am delighted now to be introducing our next speaker. We have Jennifer Nadel, co-founder and director of Compassion in Politics. Jennifer is a qualified barrister, author, political strategist, activist, and award-winning television journalist. She has reported for the BBC, Channel 4 News, and was ITN's Home Affairs editor in the UK. Jennifer's report exposing the use of rape as a weapon of war in Bosnia was used by the UN war crimes investigators, and she's reported extensively on how the law discriminates against women. Her most recent book, We, A Manifesto for Women Everywhere, was co-authored with the actress Gillian Anderson, which charts how to bring about individual and societal change. Jennifer's father came to the UK on the Kinder Transport. She's on the board of Inquest, a charity which supports families whose relatives have died in custody. Really looking forward to hearing from you, and thank you for joining us, Jennifer.
Absolute pleasure. Just trying to set my timer so I don't get carried away. Marc, I'm so sorry to hear about your aunt, and my aunt is luckily still with us, but she just turned 100 in a Florida nursing home and was all by herself, and she had been so looking forward to turning 100. And you know, these are the times that we live in. And I love that. I saw a recent post on Facebook which said, hands up who got the prize in 2015 for predicting where we would be now. None of us could see what was happening, but what has happened has merely exacerbated trends that were already there. If you think about every single social justice issue which upsets you, and I don't know if people want to post it in the chat. I mean, for me, refugees dying at sea, the people who pilot their boats being criminalized for rescuing them is very top of my list of heartbreaks. You know, we have rising hunger, not yet at US levels, thankfully, but hunger has become a normal part of life in the UK. Homelessness and just communities not involved in the life of the nation anymore. So if you look at those issues, every single heartbreaking issue, there is a common underlying cause, which is the edging out of compassion. So I've worked as a campaigner and as a journalist trying to address each of those individual areas of social justice. And now what I'm interested in is how do we tackle the underlying cause of all of them, which is the way that compassion has been edged out. And that has steadily happened as a new economic creed has gained precedence, one that places the emphasis on the individual rather than the society, one that places importance on individual success rather than goodness and civic mindedness. And it's not surprising that we have such incredibly high levels of anxiety, as Marc referred to them, and levels of self-harm, depression are all rocketing, because we live in a society which isn't actually designed to meet our most essential needs, the needs that Marc ran through: to be appreciated, to feel valued, to feel seen, to be able to be one's whole self. We have to become success machines or we become failures, and it's a very, very binary system. And what's happened in the political narrative is that not only is it about individual success, there is a twin narrative that has arisen, which is that we blame those who are struggling or who've fallen upon hard times, victim blaming. They must have done something wrong. And of course, there's a psychological reason for that. We want to defend ourselves against the knowledge that that could be us at any moment. And the cruelest twist for me in that process is that we now have a narrative which says you don't even have to help others, because if you do, you're going to create dependency. So the language of psychology has been twisted to mean that we don't even need to feel guilty that we are doing nothing for those who are hungry or without a bed at night. So we set up Compassion in Politics 2 years ago in the UK with the aim of putting compassion back into the heart of politics. And we drew together thinkers from across the globe, academics, politicians, to start talking about compassion in the political space and having it seen once again as a legitimate political driver. And we're now focusing on 3 areas. The first is the conduct of politics. You know, we can't be surprised by the division and the levels of hate in our society when we look at the way those who set the example behave themselves. And I'll talk just at the moment about the UK. You know, the mother of all parliaments, our wonderful old democracy. We have people shouting, jeering, booing, harassing, dismissing, belittling, shouting in their workplace, in the debating chamber, and it's seen as tradition and the way things are done. But we're working very hard to try and shift that. We've got together a band of 100 MPs so far who want to see normal workplace definitions of bullying, harassment applied to the floor of the House of Commons, and just to really start to change the way political dialogue happens on our television screens and visibly. So that's one thing we're doing. We are also bringing together, we've set up an all-party parliamentary group which brings together politicians from all sides to enable real cross-party collaboration to happen. You know, our binary winner-takes-all first-past-the-post system, which unfortunately is shared in America, really prizes and values tribalism. You know, who's going to win the tug-of-war of rightness? And the casualty of that tug-of-war over rightness is, of course, all of us citizens. So we bring together MPs from all parts of the House under the banner of compassion, and we say it doesn't matter what your political allegiance is, your first priority is towards compassion. And we are able to create a safe space where politicians can talk about common solutions, and it's not based on making a U-turn or being indecisive. You know, the media, my former industry, is completely complicit again in the framing of how we do politics, because it only ever wants a fight, it only ever wants a black and white situation. So how can we have leaders who are able to change their minds if they feel they've made a bad decision, agree with the opposition if they think they've said something sensible, when we have a media that dismisses such actions as weak and not in fact as true forms of leadership? And then the second area that we're looking at is the substance of politics. You know, how can we make the policies that are passed more compassionate? And we've settled upon two principles that we're seeking to put in legislation in the UK, but could equally be applied to any country. And the first is that before you pass a law, you have to do an audit to see what the impact of that measure would be on those who have least in society. Because we want to end up in a situation where it's not possible for those who have been elected to run our society to actually push those who are in the most vulnerable circumstances into hunger or homelessness. So before you can pass a measure, just as you have to do an equalities check, you need to do a check on what the impact is going to be on those who are in the most vulnerable groups in society. And the second thing you have to do an audit of, or we'd like to see an audit being done of before legislation is passed, is what impact it will have on future generations, which of course brings in climate change, which has to be involved in every single political decision we can make. And in addition to that, we work on a whole lot of other measures which we think would lead to a more compassionate society. And we also look at the narrative that we tell ourselves. You know, we tell ourselves how divided we are, how nasty we are as a race. It's almost as if we're still describing ourselves as Hobbes did in this brutal war against all. But in fact, all of our polling shows that the vast majority of the public across all political parties would like to see compassion promoted and compassionate policies introduced by their politicians. And I can see that my time is nearly up. So I'm just going to finish on one closing thought, which is a quote from the Sufi poet Rumi, which is, "Out beyond talk of good and evil, there is a place and I will meet you there." How wonderful would it be if we could use psychology so that politicians and all those engaged in the political space could learn how to soothe themselves and know when they're coming from a place of ego, deal with past resentment so they don't bring them into the present space, so that they can actually work for the greater good without being in a triggered, over-defended, self-righteous or self-aggrandizing space. Thanks so much.
Jennifer, thank you very much for those comments. And if only all our politicians could quote Rumi, maybe just even reading him will calm them down. So I want to invite our third speaker to join us, who is Dr. Claire Yorke. And Claire is an author, researcher, and former Yale Kissinger Postdoctoral Fellow. Now, her work examines empathy and emotions in international relations, politics and leadership. And she's working on 2 books on these themes. So she began her career in the British Parliament, where there wasn't too much compassion by the sounds of it, before working at Chatham House as manager of the International Security Research Department. And she did her PhD at King's College London and is on the advisory board of Resolve, Promote, and Women in International Security UK. Claire, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you as well to Jennifer and Marc for your contributions. I was nodding all the way through both of them, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation with everyone. And also just want to extend my condolences to Marc for your loss. So we've heard Marc and Jennifer talk about emotional resilience, and Marc has spoken at the individual level, and Jennifer has spoken about what this means within politics and the real central importance of compassion, which I wholeheartedly endorse. And I want to talk about why emotions are so important at the collective and societal level, especially for those in government and other organizations who are responsible for the protection, security, well-being, and prosperity of their citizens. So I want to argue that emotions are integral to resilience. And far from viewing emotions as irrational, I think they're integral to our lives, our experiences, our perceptions, and our strengths. And we need to challenge this idea that emotions are weak, that they're gendered, and that they have no place in politics, especially when we're talking about ideas of resilience. And I'll come to that shortly. And I first want to put out a question for you as well. And I want to ask you, what would it feel like, really feel like, if you felt society was resilient? How would it feel to you to be in a society that you felt could withstand challenges such as the pandemic? What would you like to see and what would you like to feel? So I think that good reason and sound judgments are informed by emotional intelligence and attunement to others. These ideas of empathy and compassion are critical to our politics. And I want us to have a bigger conversation about what this means within resilient societies. And I've got three main points. We need a far more nuanced idea of resilience and what we mean by it. We need to understand how we can be more attuned to collective moods, to public moods, and to the emotions that we experience within our communities and societies, whether that's your immediate community or in the more broader collective sense of your country or your broader identity. And then I want at the end to look at practical ideas of what this means for society, for leaderships, and for all of us as active participants within our communities. And part of my problem I have with the traditional ideas of resilience is they focus a lot on ideas of infrastructure and capabilities and systems and structures. We talk about how do we keep things secure and stable and functioning and safe. And particularly it's used in the context of terrorism and crime and natural disasters. And when I was working, it would come up a lot in these contexts. And what we've seen from the pandemic is that actually we need resilience all the time within society, but we need to also think about what we mean by resilience. And we need to be very conscious of the limitations of the concept as well. And resilience is about understanding that threats and risk and pain and loss are inevitable. We can never remove them from our lives. But what we can do is we can look at how do we collectively and individually navigate them? How do we withstand the storms and then be able to reorientate our thinking and our abilities to be better equipped for the future? And I think at the moment the attention is rightly on how our national health services and public health and welfare services are able to respond to the pandemic and the state of the economy and the long-term stability of societies. But we also need to understand that the public mood and the emotional well-being of society is equally critical to this. So how do we withstand this? And I can see from your comments, you're talking about exactly the same ideas that I would. You feel safe, you feel freedom, you want to be in a society that's forgiving and that's kind. You want to be feeling that there is a sense of compassion as well, which is great. And I would echo that. I think one of the things that's critical is a sense of belonging. A sense of community and support and compassion. It's a sense that you are seen and you are understood and you are acknowledged within society, that your voice matters, that you have a say within it. It's about a responsive government and a sense of inclusivity within all the different organizations. But what all this means is we have to be better at reading and understanding emotions at a collective level. And part of the problem with this is in our politics, we've got used to relying on big data, on abstract ideas and numbers. And emotions are not easily quantifiable. They don't fit into a scientific metrics of how we understand our societies. They defy categorization, they're subjective, they can be fleeting, they can be messy and complex and have varying intensities. And we have to accept that that is okay. I think there's a real danger that if we view politics as something neat that we can manage, that we really lose the human dimensions to it. And politics is ultimately about people, and people are intrinsically emotional. So emotions should be seen as sources of data and information that inform our judgments and what we value. And if there's anything that this pandemic has shown, it is the power and the force of emotions. And I can see from your comments as well that I'm not alone in having felt that this whole period, my emotions have been far more pronounced. They've arguably been more erratic. You can wake up one morning and you feel great, like you're going to bake the banana bread, you're going to get everything done that you needed to do because you've got time. And another day you wake up and the weight of the world is on you. You feel this enormous sense of loss for the grief of people that we have lost through this pandemic, for the livelihoods that have been lost, for the real shifts to our lives that we do not know will return. And so it's right, as Marc said, that we experience high levels of anxiety and uncertainty. And we've also in many ways lost our very normal everyday sense of regulating our emotional well-being. We cannot go and see our friends as easily. In the UK right now, we're under a lockdown. We can't go to museums to just step back and look at some art or go to the theatre. We can't really go to restaurants. You cannot get on a plane and travel like you used to be able to. All of these things that we would normally use when you're in a funk or you're having a bad moment are really curtailed. So we're having to find new ways to be resilient. And one of the things we have to be careful with this as well is that this enduring nature of the crisis means there's also a danger of emotional fatigue. We become numb to the loss, to the numbers of people that have been affected by this, and to the very real human face of the crisis. And so we've seen this contribute to more intense emotions in many ways. I think it's not necessarily a coincidence that we also have greater amount of protests at the moment, that we have far more people, far more people questioning the trust they place in their governments and in authority figures, that they feel this sense of uncertainty and anger at the unknown because they're trying to make sense of what is going on. And I think we really need to be able to read these emotions to understand, what does grief do collectively within societies? How does it circulate? What does it stick to? What does it give meaning to? What about anger? How do people express that? Where is the limit of the intensity of where it becomes a tipping point? How do we talk about those things in a way that then enables a conversation that is compassionate and inclusive and tries to address the causes of those grievances or the challenges? And I think if politicians are unable to understand the emotional impact of the crisis, the shifts of identity that we've seen, the ideas of belonging and the emotions of insecurity, both individual and collective, there's a real danger that those who do understand these felt experiences and do understand the emotions that drive people and motivate people in their politics and their interests, that others will be able to exploit them. And I think this is something particularly that we see with the rise of populism. I think people who are able to mobilize those to believe this idea of fake news, to believe very different ideas of what is factual and what is real, really tap into a felt sense of grievance and anger within society. But at the same time, we've got these very positive emotions that we see. We see that shared vulnerability offers points of connection. In the UK, we had Clap for Carers. We've also got efforts to support neighbours and communities and people stepping in to help one another and to think about the lives of others. So very quickly, if I'm going to conclude with a few points of how we move forward to more emotional resilience. I think at leadership, we should look at how some countries have managed best to do it. Leaders have been honest about the scale and severity of the problem. They've been able to read the mood and respond in an honest way and articulate the problem. They've been transparent about the measures and the compromises that they felt were involved. They've taken ownership for the solutions and the policies. They've expressed compassion and empathy for their populations, and they've aligned words and deeds, which helps to build public trust. They've combined emotional intelligence and an ability to connect with their populations with a reliance on the science and the data. And so it doesn't mean removing all the facts and data from society, but it means really about using both wisely and judiciously together. And so then I think there's a bigger conversation to be had as well, which we can come to in the discussion about what this means for our part that we play in contributing to this sense of resilience.
Claire, thank you.
Hand over to you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And so much to unpack there, which I hope we'll be able to do now. So I'm just going to invite Jennifer and Marc back into the conversation and encourage, and hopefully that's all fine. Wonderful, brilliant. Good to have everybody here. We have about 25 minutes for questions and answers with our brilliant speakers who've come at this from such wonderful, I mean, individually very similar at the individual level, but societally across some really diverse and different ways, all of which are crucial to how we operate as a society and a good society. And one of the things that we've always tried to do as a forum is to find practical ways in which others can learn, but also share. So I'm going to go straight into it. There's a question here that that has come through from Malcolm. Thank you, Malcolm, which is about social media. And Claire, you've talked, I'll come to you first, about how people's truths and how they feel is important. And I think you've written previously about the elections in the US and the importance of someone like Joe Biden doing something that Clinton did, Bill Clinton did earlier in the 90s, around meeting people where they are and really bridging the gaps that you have in society. How much does social media in all its forms impede resilience in individuals and collectively as a society, and can it be used as a force for good? I'll come to you first, Claire.
I think it's one of those, it can do both. I mean, in the positive sense, social media has connected us so much more through this crisis. We have access to far greater amounts of information, to wider communities. You can access very different sorts of news, but I think one of the problems we have is that we operate within these echo chambers, and then it distorts our sense of what we're seeing in the reality we're seeing, because we're never really challenged on our own worldview. And I think it also has quite an addictive dimension to it, where we become more sucked into it and we find validation through it, or we seek to have our own worldviews confirmed. And I think we need to find a way to balance that, to use social media for the benefits that it provides, while also understanding that it can have quite a corrosive effect on society if it's misused, and if it's used to spread disinformation or to kind of build communities in ways that are maybe detrimental to broader cohesion.
Thank you, Claire. And Jennifer, if I could come to you, I know Compassion in Politics has done some research which shows that the House of Commons has become more divided in the last 9 years in particular, and especially since the Brexit debate and discussion. And I wonder if you could speak to the role of social media in particular. And we all have heard about the difficulties of debate on social media. Do you have good examples of where compassion has been promoted effectively using social media platforms?
Great question. Well, just to say a bit about that research we did on levels of division, it was very interesting because the division started 10 years ago. It didn't start with Trump. It didn't start with Brexit. You know, 10 years ago, we had perhaps 45% of the time parties voting together on the same measures. Now it happens hardly ever. So those trends were there already. They've been exacerbated. Social media can be incredibly corrosive, and we are campaigning very hard to get the social media companies to take some responsibility from spreading hate, which they then profit from. But in terms of fake news and the promotion of compassion, you know, what's become evident is that actually facts don't matter anymore. What matters are those unmet psychological needs, you know, a sense of belonging, a sense of having importance, a sense of empowerment, a sense of agency, which belonging to a political tribe or a Brexit or a Trump or a not Brexit or a not Trump allegiance give you. But what we've seen in the UK recently, for example, we have a footballer, Marcus Rashford, who said that he had grown up hungry and that it was outrageous in the middle of this crisis that the government wasn't providing free school meals to kids through the holidays, kids that needed them, who would otherwise be going hungry, starving. And the government were a little too slow, and as a result there was this huge emotional movement, and the government had to back down because it showed that actually everyone wanted these kids fed. So social media can be incredibly positive and can spread the good. But really, it's time for the social media companies to take responsibility and limit the volume of hate that is amplified on them.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Marc, similar vein of thought in terms of social media. My own organization, a youth-focused charity, has done research which came out a few months ago, which paints a really harrowing picture that a third of young people have abandoned their aspirations for the year ahead and beyond. And so I want to put that in terms of the context of challenges that they face in terms of their own emotional resilience online. And there's a great question from Jeremy attached to it, which is how do we, and I know this is core to what you do, and so going to give you the platform. Jeremy's asking, how do we teach children emotional literacy? Are there any shifts in education as a whole to reflect this permission to feel systemically? And where have you perhaps seen that happening best across the world?
Well, I mean, that's the good news. That's my whole career. So if people didn't take seriously the social and emotional development of children, I would be, I don't know what I would do. I'd be on social media all day. And so, you know, I'm very proud to say that our approach to social and emotional learning, which is called RULER, which is an acronym for the skills of emotional intelligence. We're now in 3,000 schools here in the United States and growing rapidly. And I think there's a hunger, you know, based on what my colleagues just spoke about, there's a hunger, especially right now, you know, with this pandemic, because I think parents and teachers have come to realize that their emotions really matter. People are having more intense emotions than they've ever had before. A father, in one of my presentations, he goes, you know, I'm a lawyer, I'm a father, I'm now my son's co-teacher, I'm also the cafeteria worker, I'm also the custodian, I'm the tech coordinator. And he was just freaking out, you know, based on the roles he just had, you know, that he never had before. And of course, I said to him, well, let's reframe this. You're pretty amazing, right? He didn't appreciate that, but, you know, I think that's one of the strategies, right, is to reappraise. And so the world, I'm part of a number of organizations, you know, that are looking at this worldwide. And I would say nearly all countries that I've come in contact with are taking seriously wellness, and in particular, social and emotional learning. They see it not as ancillary, they see it as integrated into and part of the curriculum. Last thing I'll just share, I feel very blessed. A funder in the state of Connecticut gave our center a gift to create a course to be available for every educator in the state of Connecticut. And in the first 5 weeks, we've had 27,000 educators register and start the course. And on December 8th, we're going to make that course available for free worldwide. So any educator in English right now across the world can take this course. It's a 10-hour course to teach educators about the science of stress, to understand the neurobiology and psychology of stress, how our brains operate, as well as the strategies that they can use to get more granular in their own self-awareness and emotion regulation, and then importantly, supporting others. And
Marc, thank you. And forgive me, and we'll,
as you can see, I'm excited.
Please do share with us, and we'd love to share with the community. And I want to quickly come to you with a question that's come from Alice, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing slightly. You talked about a funder. How do you attend to the manipulation of human emotions by, for example, commercial interests? I think that's what we saw with Cambridge Analytica and others who deeply understood the emotions driving people's behaviors online. Is that something that you can speak to? And then I'll go to this, I'll ask the same questions, Jennifer and Claire, afterwards in relation to politics as well.
Well, again, I think being emotionally intelligent, right, means that you are pausing and reflecting and discerning the information that is coming at you. So, you know, an emotionally unintelligent person just allows themselves, sadly, to get manipulated because they're not really paying attention to the details and the cues. I would say an emotionally, you know, the joke I always have when I go to get my new car every 5 years or so, I always tell the car salesperson, listen, I study this stuff. Every strategy that you're going to use to get me to buy the extra feature, I get it. And of course, I get sucked into buying all the extra features, but that's a whole other story. The point is that when we are aware of our own and others' emotions and have the strategies to manage them effectively, we make more informed decisions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marc. And Jennifer, if I could come to you with a similar question in terms of how do you counter when there is a really interesting and good grasp of emotions? And on one hand, we're looking to build up from the ground a foundation of emotional resilience and intelligence amongst the core community. But at the same time, simultaneously, you're dealing with people who are manipulating emotions, and actually it's in their interest to potentially have emotionally unintelligent people to continue. How do you reconcile that?
You're absolutely right. And of course, the emotion that is being courted is fear, because we know that when people are frightened, they are going to vote for more populist causes. So a lot of the work is about creating enough emotional safety or enough space to be able to give that considered response. There's some wonderful research that was done in the States that Marc will probably be able to reference for me, where people were asked about their attitudes on immigration, and if they were given hand sanitizer before they answered that question, they were far more expansive towards immigration. So we know that trying to create a sense of safety and well-being will open people up to being more expansive and more compassionate. But really, I think that we are not judging humans correctly. You know, we still practice core values in our homes, the value of compassion. We don't throw members of the family out if they cease to be of economic value. We take care of the generation that's coming next and try and put money aside for them. And those values persist. It's just that there's a bilinguality about it. It's fine for us in our homes, but somehow the connection has been cut or nearly cut. I don't think it's been completely cut between how we treat others that are not in our instant small circle. So I think there's work to be done around increasing the circle of connectedness.
Thank you. And Claire, similar question, and I'll expand on it with a question from Salma. Salma, thank you for your question, which is, how can society be resilient when so much trust and faith is lost in the government and the leaders to make decisions? And in the UK, we've famously seen a number of examples which may have contributed, one of which is a special advisor to the Prime Minister breaking a lockdown rule, and then the government defending the actions, even though it countered what arguably many say they were promoting with others. How do you build resilience when trust is at such a high deficit?
Yes, thank you. It's a great question. I think it does really speak to the challenges that we're facing right now. I'm really struck. I was in the US until July, and when I came back to the UK, I'm really struck by how many people talk about the moment that Dominic Cummings went to Barnard Castle was a critical moment in when people stopped complying. They were willing to make the sacrifices and the compromises, and it was tough, but they were on board. But that break and the misalignment with actions and deeds really was, I think, detrimental to it. I think here, though, this idea of resilience, trust is very hard to rebuild, incredibly easy to break, but it's not irreparable. And I think what we need to see is far more transparency in politics. I would love to see politicians treat the electorate as if they are more informed and more intelligent, you know, give more complete answers, really explain the processes and the compromises that are involved in designing policy, speak about the complexity. I think a lot of citizens are very open to the fact that politics is not easy. There's never going to be a completely right answer in a democracy because you're trying to align so many different points of view and experiences. But the more you have someone, and I always point to Jacinda Ardern because I really think she's doing a good job, that is able to stand up and say, this is how we're going to do this. These are the principles guiding my decision. These are the values. This is the data I'm working with. And when I get it wrong, I'm going to stand in front of you and I'm going to tell you that I've got it wrong and how I'm going to make it better. And I think it's through concerted effort like that and the modeling of good behavior and good citizenry that we start to rebuild that trust in society. I don't think it's irreparable, but I do think it's been incredibly damaged. And they're going to have to do a real job of rebuilding that, I think, in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Claire. And there's a question here from Monte, which I'd like to expand on. And it's a comment which says, resources must be dedicated to the arts in music, poetry, painting, theatre, as culture ameliorates and inspires our communities. And there's something there about, in terms of emotions being evoked in society, there's certain industries that do so more than others. is that, from your experience, is that so in terms of working in politics, do we have to engage more in the arts to be able to get a societal shift in how people feel a bit more publicly? Jennifer, if I can come to you, and I think about this in a British context where it's almost not allowed to be overly emotional. It's not part of our psyche. What would you say to Monty's comments about the need to promote more in the arts?
I think he's absolutely right. And of course, the arts are a wonderful way of getting people to connect with others and to identify with people that they wouldn't necessarily identify with. So they're a fantastic vehicle for bringing challenging, complex stories that aren't, as Claire said, normally discussed fully to the screen and into people's homes. But the other thing I would say is that in terms of resilience, you know, the thing that I think is so often overlooked, but actually has such a huge impact on resilience is joy. You know, joy doesn't produce anything tangible. And so we can easily think we haven't got time, we've got too much to do, but actually, you know, I like to think of each of us as having a pilot light inside, and the more we're doing, the more easily it gets to get burnt out, the smaller the pilot light becomes. But when we just take a moment, even if it's just to look outside of the window at the sky, you know, what's the sky doing? You know, I'm just in the middle of a divorce, and when my husband left, I decided on the walk to my child's school that I would take a picture of something I hadn't noticed before every day for a year. And it just transformed that first year for me, because my focus was on things of beauty that had nothing to do whether my husband was there or wasn't there. And so, you know, one of the things that we teach on the courses that we run on resilience and compassion in politics is how to cultivate and how to encourage joy.
Thank you. And Marc, Laura has said something, which is, it's not enough to know how you feel. We need to cultivate spaces that allow children and adults to feel how they feel, embracing all spectrum of vulnerability and courage. Beyond obviously Ruler and the work that you do, how can more spaces be cultivated to allow that to happen? And can you give maybe some examples that you have seen in recent months that have been exceptionally good at creating those spaces in a pandemic?
Yeah, I think, you know, firstly, we live in contexts. And so these, you know, the best example, you know, in regard to emotions is, does everyone have equal permission to express their feelings? And the answer is no, they don't, because of a variety of reasons, race being one of them. You know, I speak a lot about this because as a white male professor, I have greater permission to express my anger compared to my Black male colleague who are perceived differently than I am, not based on anything other than skin color. So these are complex skills that are nested in larger contexts. And this is why the work that we do focuses on layers of shifting people's mindsets. Right? You've got to believe that emotions matter and understand the science behind them. The second, it has to do with the skill building, that these are discrete skills that take time. And yes, self-awareness is insufficient. You've got to have the regulatory capacity, and you've got to also be able to support other people in their feelings. But it's larger than that. It's culture and climate of a home, of a school, of a workplace, of a community. How do people feel working in that community? And then finally, something that we have not done a very good job at either is examining our policies. Do our policies provide people with opportunities to be their true, full feeling selves? In schools where I work mostly, what's the bullying policy? What's the suspension policy? You know, there's no developing emotional intelligence when you expel someone from school. What's the learnings there? When you do bad things, you get kicked out. Not a great way to build an emotionally intelligent nation.
Thank you, Marc. And Claire, just opportunity to comment on the arts conversation and the spaces where people can feel comfortable about sharing. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I love this idea that Jennifer said about cultivating joy. I think that's something we often miss so much within politics. And I'm always struck when I talk about the power of collective moods. I think anyone who was in Britain in 2012 during the Olympics really felt this collective feeling of national pride and support and community. It really felt like the country came together in a way that was very noticeably opposite in 2016 after Brexit. And I think there's all these ways in which we experience it. And that was largely also through the arts. I mean, the opening ceremony was this huge display of music and arts and theatre and performance. And it built that sense of belonging and identity and connection that really resonated with how people felt about their identity and their country and what made them a part of that community. And I think as another thing on the arts, I'm really skeptical about this move to rely solely on the sciences and data. I think they're absolutely essential, but we need to be doing far more to value literature and the arts and music and philosophy and the humanities and social sciences, because they teach us about people. They teach us about who we are, and they touch on that magic spark that makes us entrepreneurial and creative. And that's what helps us build connection and helps us have empathy.
Thank you, Claire. There's a question here, and I'm just so conscious of time that I just want to say thank you to everybody who has contributed, continues to contribute on the chat function. We're not going to be able to get through everything. I hope we can continue this conversation offline or in other online spaces. Samia from Tunisia has asked a question, which is, do you think that good people are doing enough to counter populism that is spreading so quickly? And if I take that one step further, I guess the question I'd love to ask is, what more should good people be doing in terms of promoting? I mean, it's a difficult one to extrapolate. What more can individuals do, I guess, in trying to create the society, Marc, where, like you say, at every element and every layer, what responsibility do we have unto ourselves as leaders in our spaces or as members of society to try and create exactly that culture that you just described? And how much of that is, and I guess for me, I always think about this in terms of, there are bad entities who are out there online who are creating spaces of division, and there seems to be a deficit of passion almost. And this is what folks who work in online violent extremism spaces will say. There's a passion deficit between those who are sowing seeds of division and those who are promoting active goodness in society. How do we cultivate that within ourselves to be a bit more aggressive, if you will, in promoting that goodness and that joy and creating those spaces? I hope that made sense.
Well, I'm completely overwhelmed by your question, just so you know.
Apologies.
Let me pass because I need to think about it. Would someone else like to go first?
I want to answer.
Jennifer, thank you.
I want to answer that, because the first thing I have to say is, the moment you label someone good or bad, you other them, and we have to lose that. We absolutely have to lose that. We are all equal human beings of equal worth, with our own woundedness, with our own psychological makeup, with our own emotional histories that lead us to react to situations in ways that we do. There is nothing good nor bad about any of us. We just are. However, there are actions that we as individuals take which have bad consequences. So if I can just reframe the question, I absolutely know what was meant, but just to lose the labels. So the first thing we need to do is take off our rightness and our goodness and put it aside, because that immediately creates a division. You know, we talk about building bridges and not walls, but those of us who feel the other side is stupid or wrong or cruel instantly build a much bigger wall than is anything built of bricks or barbed wire. And what we have to do is learn to sit with the uncomfortableness of listening to someone express views that we don't want to hear about. So our job is, if we want to heal these divisions, is to go out and make sure we talk to people we don't normally talk to. Make sure we form connection. We don't need to talk about Trump and we don't need to talk about Brexit, but we do need to form bonds of common humanity, because we have forgotten that there is so much more that joins us together than there is that divides us.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, and for re-articulating my question in a much more structured way. Marc, does that is an opportunity to come back?
I'm going to go way off of my topic of expertise and just share with you something different, which is my partner and I and a team are building a documentary right now, and it's called 2020 Americans, and we're filming and taking portraits of 2,020 people across the entire United States, from California to New York and everywhere in between. And we're listening to people's stories from Native Americans to people who run Black Lives Matter campaigns to people who are Trump supporters, Biden supporters. And when you get to know these people, everybody, there's a common humanity. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody has a deep need to be heard. And most people, even a mom that we interviewed just 2 days ago who lost 2 children to police brutality, she has 6 other children, she still has hope. And I just think that we have to hold on to those core elements of what it means to be human. We need to be heard, as we spoke about before, and that we have to, if we don't have hope and optimism, there's nowhere to go. And so I have to say that personally, I'm a neurotic, cautious optimist. and it's worked for me in many ways. But yeah, I just think that we have to I learned from a leader who was my mentor, be the listener, not the speaker. Be the curious explorer, not the knower. And I think if we do more of that, we're going to see bridges crossed.
Thank you, Marc. And Claire?
Oh, I love both of those answers, and especially I was nodding along to Jennifer. I think it's so true that we humans are these complex, messy beings, and the more that we give space to one another, I think it's so important to find that source of connection. And I think one of the things that people have struggled with in some ways with Brexit or with the election of Trump was that they found that people who've been their neighbors and their family members have voted in ways that they don't always understand. But people vote in the ways they do because there are reasons and grievances or interests that they want. And I think the more we start to have a conversation about what does a good society look like? What does security look like to you? What do you want for the future of your children? What would help you to feel that you are listened to and that you are heard? And exactly about finding those spaces. And my work, my books are both on empathy and their importance. And it's really about this process of sitting down with people, like Marc said, and listening and learning people's stories and learning what makes them tick and unique and wonderful beings. And I think we need to get better at asking our friends, how are you? Like, how really are you feeling? And we need to then be able to listen. And especially someone mentioned on the comments that it's often very hard, in particular for men, to do that. We need to create more space for men to be able to express and share their emotional state without it being seen as a sense of weakness. And we need to be able to really have a discussion about how we work together to come through this. And I think that's going to be a very painful and difficult conversation. And as Jennifer said, it means we need to have uncomfortable conversations and we need to listen to things that we're maybe not going to like. And that doesn't mean you don't set boundaries. It doesn't mean you don't say, I want to have this conversation, I want to learn from you. But in this conversation, there is no space for racism or sexism or homophobia or anything like that. But let's understand, where are you going? Like, what's your thoughts? What are your feelings about this? And I think giving time and space to really engage with people's emotions will take us forward and help us all invest in the hard work that's needed to get there.
Claire, Jennifer, Marc, thank you for your time, your vulnerability today, your pearls of wisdom, and just generally the work that you're doing in genuinely trying to make our society better and good. And I will use a label, I hope you don't mind, Jennifer, a good society, which we all strive for. Emma, you are in demand. We have Paquita asking, why haven't we heard from Emma? Over to you.
Thank you, Liz. And I want to echo your thanks to Marc, Jennifer, and Claire for this wonderful discussion on emotion, on resilience, on compassion, on our common humanity. And thank you to all of the audience for your many, many questions. It's been a really wonderful hour that we've spent together. And I look forward to seeing you again in December for the next Good Society Forum. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everybody.